What is up, everybody? Clint Lamb with Cover Crimson here to talk about Jayvin James, the offensive tackle out of Mississippi State. Entered the transfer portal yesterday, was pretty quick. Alabama was almost immediately connected to him, and soon after, Alabama has now landed yet another offensive lineman to add to what has been a pretty good offensive line haul in the transfer portal. And so we're going to be talking about him and talking about where this offensive line stands, and also talking a little bit about Bandit Malik Franklin. Come to find out, he might be playing a different position than I had anticipated for him. So we'll be discussing that as well, what I think that means. Appreciate everybody for being here. The BD James, appreciate you, brother. Roll Tide 35, thanks for being here. Spanish Fort, Alabama, good deal. Trent, Derek, appreciate you being here. Tino, as always, Roll Tide to you. And of course, Tino, all that Mississippi State coverage has become real useful. It has. I talked about Mississippi State's offensive line pretty extensively all throughout the offseason. I watched it and kept up with it. I really didn't do anything from a coverage standpoint much during the season, but I did keep up and just wanted to see how all that was playing out for them. And I did talk about Jayvin James, and I talked about how I thought he was a stabilizing player for them early in the season. And so we'll be talking about all of that stuff. This is going to be an interesting conversation because I'm not surprised that Alabama continued to target offensive linemen, especially when you consider the lack of experience. Like, the thing about James, he's 6'5", he's 320 pounds. He has played at Akron. He ended up transferring to Maryland, only spent the spring at Maryland, then transferred. That was in the spring of 2025, transferred to Mississippi State, ended up getting a role at Mississippi State and ended up being their starting left tackle. Also played quite a bit of right tackle. We'll be getting to that in here in just a second. And then now he's at Alabama. So not only does he have experience, having some, I want to say 9 starts, I believe, at Akron, but he's now had 12 starts as a left tackle in the SEC. And I think that's very, very valuable. We'll be talking about, it's pretty obvious, but we'll be talking about why as we start to work our way through it. Appreciate all you guys for being here. Crimson Mimi, Eufaula. We played Eufaula in the state championship back in 2006, and that's who we ended up beating. It was Courtney Upshaw, and they had Jarrell Jernigan at quarterback. He ended up being a receiver for Troy, got drafted in the 3rd round by the New York Giants. They had a really good football team. They were undefeated, but we figured out a way to get it done. And so there were some great signs. We won't get into that, but love me some Eufaula. I have a lot of respect for what you guys did. I haven't really kept up with the program since then, but appreciate you being here. David Monroe, appreciate you being here. Jason Hine, Roll Tide Roll. Love how much info and detail you go into. Thank you so much. John, appreciate you as always for being here, brother. Alabama Poe, what did I miss? You missed a commitment, and it's you'll understand why when we start getting into it. But I think it was an important get for Alabama. It's not a world-beating addition. It's not this isn't a Jacarius Peak that's going to completely change the outlook of your offensive line. It adds competition. It adds experience to that room, much needed experience, not only as a starter, but also as an SEC starter. And I think he's got the upside and kind of the skill set that you look for at the position to kind of end up making an impact. But now that you guys are starting to roll in, we'll kind of really start to get started here. As I said, Jayvin James commits to Alabama, 6'5", 320 pounds, will be a redshirt junior this upcoming season, has spent his time, at Akron, at Maryland briefly, only the spring, Mississippi State and Alabama. For his career, he's played just under 1,400 snaps, and he's had 21 starts in his career, including 12 in 2025 at Mississippi State. And I want to say he played like 855 snaps, I believe, for the Bulldogs this past season. He has the versatility to play left or right tackle. And this is something that I don't feel like enough people are talking about, because I do think that ends up playing kind of a part in why he's so valuable. Like, he's not being brought in. Jacarius Peak, he's your left tackle if you bring him in. There's no doubt about it. He's your starter automatically. And if for whatever reason he didn't make that transition well and he was struggling, well, you're paying him a ton of money, so you kind of be committed. But B, like, Peak does have experience as a right tackle, so he could have played that as well. But I think you'd have a much tougher time coming off of him being your left tackle than a guy like James. But so he didn't start the first week for Mississippi State, ended up starting the second week against Arizona State. And here's what's fascinating. He was a guy who was willing to bounce back and forth mid-game between left and right tackle. I mean, they started off, I think Albert Reese was their starter at left tackle. He ends up getting injured. They move, Jayvin James into the starting lineup. And then, you have Jimothy Lewis, who was somebody that Alabama had been going after. He ends up at Cal. And he's a young player, pretty inexperienced, very inconsistent. So Jayvin James would kind of give them the ability to have a left or right tackle that could go in, give them serviceable, solid reps, and they could kind of work around his versatility. So he played left tackle against Arizona State. He played right tackle the following week against Alcorn State. He started at right tackle. Then against Northern Illinois in week 4, he played both left and right tackle. Against Tennessee in week 5, both left and right tackle. And then from that point forward, he was the starter at left tackle for the next 3 games, started against Arkansas at right tackle, and then for the remainder of the season was back over at left tackle. This had a lot more to do with the pieces around James than James. This wasn't, they were struggling to, he was struggling at left tackle and they were trying to figure out a way to keep him on the field, but not put that responsibility on him. No, I just think he had the versatility, he had the experience, and they could kind of do some different things with him. And when you start comparing that to what Alabama's going to have along its offensive line, the competition, I think that that's pretty important because you actually start looking at this. And I think right now, based off of this edition, this is a guy who has been a starter in the SEC. I don't think he's being brought. I don't think he was told, hey, come over and be a depth guy for us, be a rotational piece. I don't think they promised him anything, but I bet he was told you'll have a chance to compete. And you'll have a chance to compete at left tackle because Michael Carroll, regardless of what else is going on, he's going to be your starter at right tackle in 2026, or at least that's my opinion. So what I think that this does is I think the left tackle competition, there's one of 2 ways it can work out. Either A, the competition is going to come down to Jackson Lloyd, Jayvin James, or Ty Haywood, or the possibility that Ty Haywood could go ahead and move inside. If you feel like he's a better guard, you feel like he can compete for a starting job at guard, and kind of in my offensive line projections, I've been having him as the projected starter at right guard. I think he would ultimately win that battle. Then, you don't really want him, especially as a young player, a developmental player, with some rawness to his game. You don't want him bouncing back and forth between guard and tackle. So if you feel like he is honestly a strong candidate to be a starter for you on the inside, and the fact that he is so young, you probably want to go ahead and move him to the inside. It probably wouldn't have been wise to have him battle it out with Jackson Lloyd. You like Jackson Lloyd. Lloyd ends up winning the job. Now you're trying to move Ty Haywood, who has had very little to actually no experience at guard. Now you're trying to move him inside and get him ready to be a starting caliber player. The fact that you have competition for Jackson Lloyd and Jayvin James, who has experience in the SEC, and the fact that you can now move Ty Haywood off of tackle if you want to. Now, they might choose to not do that. They might want to have him in that competition. But I think right now you have the experience factor and the youth factor that's really talented between Lloyd and James. I like that way more. Plus, with James, the fact that he has so much experience as both a left and right tackle, he's had starting experience at Akron. He was the right tackle. At Mississippi State, he was the left tackle. So he's got starting experience at both. I think ultimately Jackson Lloyd ends up winning the job. I'm a big fan of Jackson Lloyd. I think he's a really good player. Now, it's still possible that he's like a year away from really being ready. I think he's going to be ready in 2026. And so I ultimately think he's going to be your starting left tackle this upcoming season. And if that ends up being the case, Jayvin James now has the ability to be your swing tackle. If something happens with Michael Carroll, he can come in, provide a stable, experienced option there at right tackle. If something happens with Jackson Lloyd, he could end up being your left tackle, step in, provide a serviceable backup at left tackle. I like that setup, and I like the idea of getting Ty Haywood, go ahead and getting him inside. I think that's really smart by the coaching staff. And this group just really needed experience. Racing Delgatti has some experience. Michael Carroll has, well, obviously Delgatti has plenty of experience. Michael Carroll has some experience. Will Sanders a little bit. Nick Brooks has, a handful of starts in the SEC. But outside of those guys, you don't really have anybody that's got a ton of experience. Now you have Rayson Delgatti and you have Jayvin James. That's a much better place to start, in my opinion. So that's kind of my thoughts on it. Now, by the way, if you want to guarantee that your comment will be read, hit us up with a super chat. Someone's already done that, but I just wanted to go ahead and let everybody know. I will try to get some of these that are not super chats, but it's just when they start coming in, it's a lot of them. So we'll work our way through it the best that we can. But I'll go ahead and get to start getting to some of your questions or comments or whatever. We'll start obviously with Jonesy. Appreciate the 199 super chat. This staff loves tackle types, 9 total, I think. I guess it would depend when you say tackle types. I have it at 8 based off of guys who I currently have projected to play tackle. The interior guys are Rayson Delgatti, Ethan Fields, Will Sanders, Casey Poe, Nick Brooks, Mal Waldrop, Caden Strayhorn, and Chris Booker. So unless maybe you view Nick Brooks because he's 6'7" and has just a ton of length, maybe you view him as a tackle type, which is fine. But they do. They like the guys because a lot of times it's a lot more difficult to take a guard and make him a tackle than it is to take a tackle and make him a guard. I mean, what do we see from Evan Neal at Alabama, right? I mean, he started off as a left guard, ended up going to right tackle, and then he went to left tackle. You look at, J.C. Latham, played right guard early in his career. Alex Leatherwood started off as a guard. So from just an athleticism standpoint and just the versatility, a lot of times you're going to like the tackle types a little bit more than the interior types. But I do think there is a place for those interior guys. Now, something else that I wanted to mention that I just found interesting about, James. Number one is it wasn't always pretty for Mississippi State. This wasn't like a home run. This guy's a bona fide, surefire, dominant left tackle in the Southeastern Conference. He is not that player. I saw plenty of struggles. If you want to see struggles from him in particular, but really just Mississippi State's offensive line in general, go turn on the Missouri tape. It was ugly. And there have been times where Jayvin James has committed penalties. In fact, in that, if I'm not mistaken, I want to say he had 4 penalties against Missouri. Like, he gave up a couple of pressures, didn't give up any sacks. I think he gave up 3 sacks this year, with 2 coming against Texas A&M and then 1 coming against Ole Miss. But Missouri, he did give up a couple pressures, but he also 4 penalties committed against Missouri. Now, that entire Mississippi State offense, guys' heads were spinning. It was a rough performance for everybody. So, but I mean, it got away from him. It felt very Wilkin Formby-esque as far as just, wow, how in the world is one player responsible for this many penalties while also kind of struggling? So I'm not going to sugarcoat it and say, man, this guy's amazing, but I saw some really good stuff on tape. And I think from just, he's got solid athleticism. He's obviously a big guy. He's long. He's got despite the fact that he's 6'5"-ish, he's got a lot of length. I would say from a length standpoint, he's closer to being like a 6'6", 6'7" type of guy. And so I like that. I mean, and plus he's gained 25 pounds. So like when he was a starter at Akron, I think he was 290 or 295 pounds, and now he's sitting at 320. So he's added the needed mass. He's gotten his feet wet in the SEC, and he brings that experience. But I don't want people thinking or me just completely ignoring that this guy's not, the consistency factor with him. There's still work that needs to be done, but it's once again another competitor for your offensive line, more than likely at left tackle. But once again, I'll reiterate this, it's what it does for Ty Haywood. If you feel like he's a starter, get him inside, let him go compete to be a starter instead of trying to flip him positions at the last minute for such a young player. He just redshirted. He played in 3 games. He had 15 total snaps on the season. Very inexperienced. Get him to the position that he's going to play unless you just have to have him at, left tackle. So before, because I didn't see any, just blatantly obvious competitors for Jackson Lloyd at left tackle, it made a lot of sense for Ty Haywood to be that guy. But now it really solves a lot of issues. And if Jayvin James ends up being terrible, well, I mean, maybe you do let Ty Haywood compete out there. Maybe with some of these true freshmen like a Bryson Cooley ends up pushing Jackson Lloyd. Maybe something like that ends up happening. But once again, I really like it. To me, this kind of feels a little not to the extent because I like this tape way more, but it feels a little Tyler Steen-esque when he was coming out of Vanderbilt. Because if you remember, I mean, back in that, what was that, 2022, I believe? Like you had Tommy Brockermeyer, who was a redshirt freshman. You had J.C. Latham, who was a sophomore. He had played a little bit, but you had like guys like Tyler Booker and Elijah Pritchett as true freshmen. You had more veteran players like Kendall Randolph. You had Damian George on that team. And Tyler Steen was brought in, and it was like a lot of people, I think, they wanted the young, flashy five stars. They wanted J.C. Latham starting, and they wanted Tommy Brockermeyer starting. Well, Tyler Steen ended up winning that job, and he ended up being a really, really good player for Alabama. Now, just because it worked out that way for Steen doesn't mean it's going to work out the same way for Jayvin James. But what I am saying is that Nick Saban understood, while we have a ton of talent on our offensive line, we really need an established veteran. We really need someone that could come in and compete with some of that talent and could, more so ensure that we're either going to get really good play from the young player, what we need to from a development standpoint, or we can turn to this veteran, experienced option in Tyler Steen, and we can still get serviceable quality play at left tackle. They got more than that. I think he got more than he bargained for, as far as, what Steen ended up being, and ended up being a third-round draft pick to the Philadelphia Eagles. Now he's starting at right guard in the NFL. So I'm not saying it's going to be James. And in fact, when I watched Steen at Vanderbilt, I thought he had much better tape than James. But this feels kind of similar, where you're bringing a guy in, an experienced option, to kind of raise the floor of your offensive line, add another experienced option, and allow him to push or compete with some of those young, talented players like a Jackson Lloyd. I absolutely love that. Let's see. Let's start working through some of these comments. Let's see. All right. Appreciate you, Will P. Best Bama show on the internet. Thank you so much. And I'm glad to be back with you guys live. Last couple of days we've pre-recorded, but I love, give me any reason to hop on here live with you guys. I absolutely love it. Chad, appreciate you being here. Roll Tide Clint from Savannah, Georgia. Love your content, man. Keep it up. Thank you so much. Lance Hunter, still want a solid linebacker. It's possible. A lot of those Miami linebackers have been entering the transfer portal. I don't know if Alabama's going to pursue any of those guys, but I mean, you could end up seeing, Clinton Dix. He's got a family member who is from a much smaller school, just entered the transfer portal recently. Don't know what will end up happening with that. But I like this off-ball linebacker group. I really do. I have no idea which are going to start, but in a lot of ways, that's not a bad thing. I'm not looking at this group and thinking, man, I don't see any starters. I don't see any surefire 100% guaranteed starters, because I view them all similarly. I could totally see, a Caden Jones, a Caleb Woodson, QB Reese, Luke Metz, Duke Johnson, Abdul Sanders, or even a guy like Xavier Griffin. I could literally see any of those 7 players pushing for one of the 2 starting jobs. And in some ways, the uncertainty of that could cause some fans to be concerned. But I look at that and say, well, I mean, I just think they're going to end up getting really good play. QB Reese, I worry about the size a little bit, being 6 foot, 224, I think, pounds. Caden Jones, tall, 6'4", 228 pounds, not overly long. He's tall, but he's not long. I think he's kind of got a little bit shorter arms. So just because he's 6'4", that does help relative to like a shorter guy, but it's not an end-all be-all. He's a versatile piece, though. I think he's got some ability as an off-ball blitzer. If you want to do some things, in those obvious passing situations, like they would put Deontay Lawson on the line of scrimmage and kind of allow him to be that 4th rusher. I could see that for a Caden Jones. But I don't know what's going to end up happening at off-ball linebacker, which is why I brought up on Twitter last night that it's one of the most intriguing battles out of every battle on the roster. I like all the different options and the different directions that they could go. Let's see. Chad, Clint, with all the will all these transfer portal guys come right in for the 4th quarter program, or are they enrolling later? I think it's still to a point where all of them can enroll, and they will all be available for pre-spring and for spring practice. I haven't heard anything as far as a player having to wait to enroll until after the spring. And what I love is that now, with there just being one transfer portal window, this roster, this current group is currently locked in. And what I love is that if you're Alabama and you see potential guys who can help you, more competition that you want to bring in, you have no fear of losing a player over that. That is such a massive change because before it was, well, we might need to wait until post spring because we really want to see this guy in the spring. We want to give him reps and opportunities. But we also, if we bring in the competition now, he has the ability post spring if he's not happy to leave. And so the way that it's set up is you have zero fear of adding anybody new to your roster. All you can do is kind of bolster at this point. Now, to what degree, that is to be determined. But all you can really do at this point is help your roster. And I think that's huge because if anybody, you might have been in danger of potentially losing a player had you brought in a Jayvin James before the transfer portal closed. But instead, you're able to bring him in for more depth and more competition, and you're not really risking losing anything. And I think that's pretty beneficial as well. Let's see. Way offsides. Any chance that these kids needing polish, pushing further competition on the offensive line, makes them work a little harder? I'm not sure I understand any chance that these kids needing polish, pushing further competition on the offensive line. I'm probably just reading that wrong, but I think what you're saying is these younger guys who need to be pushed by competition, like, will this make them work harder, I guess? And the answer to that question is 100%. Like this competition, not only will the veteran, experience help just from a locker room standpoint, bringing guys along. They've been in a college system. They know what to expect. It is going to be different. I guarantee you, whatever Jayvin James went through at Akron or Maryland for a brief period of time or Mississippi State, it's going to be different in how things operate in Tuscaloosa. But that's a guy who's kind of been through it. He's seen some things. He's had his butt whipped. Against Texas A&M with their pass rush, Cassius Howell, and then that pass rush that we're all familiar with Zion Young and Damon Wilson from Missouri. He's had his butt straight up whipped a couple of times. He's been through some stuff, but I think that experience helps him. And I think that can help bring along your younger players who are competing. And it just, once again, if you're not getting the development that you need to out of guys that you were kind of banking on before, like if you're really truly banking on either Ty Haywood or Jackson Lloyd as a young player with zero experience, if neither one of those two guys ends up stepping up and providing what you need for them to at left tackle, where do you turn? What do you do? And there's like a floor now. I don't think Jayvin James, if he ended up being the starting left tackle, I don't think he would be terrible by any means, especially if they can continue to work and get him more acclimated to playing at 320 pounds and more acclimated to playing in the SEC. I still think you would get serviceable, solid play out of him. Once again, I don't think he would be a world beater, but I think you get good play. But that's kind of like the fallback. Okay, if everything else falls apart here, that we're expecting at some of these spots, when you add players like that, it really elevates the floor of your offensive line. And now you can more so focus on the ceiling of it, which I personally like and respect how they're going about it. The other thing too, how often do you get a starting left tackle in the SEC? I don't care where he comes from, and we also got to remember Mississippi State was a 2-win football team, I believe, in 2024, either 2 or 3. I think it was 2 though. I'm 90% sure it was 2. And they just went 5-7 and they were much improved. They were a lot more competitive in these games. I'm not saying that entire difference was Jayvin James. I'm saying that you could kind of clearly tell players like James arrive in Starkville. They're playing a different caliber of football than what they were playing in 2024, and it really helped elevate the overall success of that football team. So in some ways, that kind of tells you what type of player Jayvin James is. Once again, it's guys being comfortable in that system. It's players on both sides of the football. It goes way beyond James, but he was one of those players for me because I think he gave that offensive line better play than just about, maybe there was like one guy, but I would say maybe better than just about every offensive lineman that Mississippi State had the last 2 years. So that kind of tells you everything you want to know. The bookie, Clint, what's one thing you're hearing behind the scenes about this Alabama team that fans won't really see until the season starts? First of all, that is a phenomenal question. Secondly, I'll say that I'm probably not positioned to answer that question in January. I respect it. I understand exactly why you're asking it, but you really won't start hearing, like, they're just now starting to get this team together, and they'll start going through, workouts and doing all those things leading up to spring. And then the coaching staff will see guys on the practice field and start to evaluate. And then you'll get into the fourth quarter summer program. And it's really, spring and summer where we really start hearing the information. Now, what I will say is some of the information that I feel like I heard last offseason didn't end up happening. It wasn't great football that we saw against Florida State compared to the expectations that had kind of been laid out for me. And so this offseason, I'll be a little bit more cautious and taking, and if I hear good things and they end up coming to fruition and it ends up being fact, that's just gravy. I mean, and I'll definitely bring up a lot of that stuff when I hear it, but I also won't be buying it hook, line, and sinker and just selling it to you guys as it's like a foregone conclusion that this is happening or this is happening. I'll be a little bit more reserved this offseason, but I will say I think there's a lot to be excited about. I've continued to reiterate that with this group. I think at pretty much every position you've brought in competition. There's a lot of uncertainty. And I said earlier on the Miller's Edge, I joined Christian and we chopped it up a little bit. And I know people kind of give him a hard time for being overly negative, or I think he's just giving you an honest assessment. And I mentioned this on Twitter the other day, never blame anybody for being honest with you, because there's nothing that Christian wants more, I'm sure, than to tell you everything's good and great and wonderful and that they're going to be awesome in 2026. And you have so much to be excited about. But if he truly doesn't believe it, then he shouldn't be telling you that. And, it's kind of the reason I've been a little bit more reserved, and I've learned from some of my mistakes, is I saw what happened against Florida State, and I felt awful. I felt like at the time, I'd felt used. They ended up bouncing back. They ended up winning a college football playoff game. They went to the SEC championship. They weren't too far off. I mean, the certain positions, yes, but they weren't too terribly far off from what I kind of heard about the team in the offseason, other than they somehow couldn't translate the physicality from practice to the game field. But, how I kind of bought and packaged the information that I was being given in the offseason versus what was shown against Florida State, I never want to put you guys through that again if I can help it. So if I say some things this offseason that you don't like, or you want me to be super positive about everything, I'm going to be positive. I'm going to try to wrap this in a way because I'm just naturally an optimistic person. And it's very clear to me when you look at a lot of these positions, there's a lot to be optimistic about. But I also am I'm going to do everything I can to make sure you guys aren't put in a position where you're hearing one thing and you're super excited about it, and then the first game of the season rolls around and you could not have been let down anymore. It would have been impossible. And I'll never forget that in my entire career. I'll never forget how that whole thing went down. So just a little behind the scenes. If you see me being a little critical or I'm sharing concerns, understand I'm just trying to make sure that there's some level of realistic expectations for everybody involved, and that none of us end up being shell shocked by the time this all rolls around. Jonesy, Clint, kind of off topic, but I'm of the opinion that this offense will have to be successful running the ball out of 11 personnel if it wants to have consistent production. Your thoughts? We'll have to be successful running the ball out of 11 personnel. Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that. I mean, anytime that you're able to kind of go 12 personnel and you can run the football better to an extent that's expected. But the thing about it is I don't think people realize, like the average fan realizes, that right now for so long it was all personnel. A lot of the mind games and things that were being played like it's a personnel battle. Okay, if they want to go 12 personnel, we'll match it with 3-4. We'll go with 3-4 personnel defensively. Or, if they go 11 personnel, we're going to go with like our 4-2-5 nickel look or whatever. But I think like the more that you can do the thing in those different personnel packages that really you're not expected to do, the more difficult your offense is to defend. I don't know if I'm explaining that well, but essentially what I'm trying to say is if you can run the football out of 12 personnel, that's fine, but you're kind of expected to run the football pretty well out of 12 personnel. Like if you can run the football effectively out of 11, then that makes you all the more dangerous because you are a bigger passing threat with 3 receivers on the field and you're still able to effectively run the football. So I think that's what you're saying here. And I completely agree. In this offense and just the way that it operates, like you're going to see different personnel packages, not a ton of like 21 personnel or anything like that, but you're going to see 11 and you're going to see 12 pretty frequently. Maybe not to the extent that we've seen in the past with some of the 12 stuff, but there's a reason that they've been stacking tight ends and they want to have multiple options at tight end. They want to be able to do a little bit more with some of that. And if you've got some pretty effective pass catchers, like something that has made Georgia's offense pretty tough in some ways to defend at times is that they can go bigger with multiple tight ends and go 12 personnel, and then they're still effective pass catchers. And in some ways, when you got a Brock Bowers type, he's like a dynamic pass catcher. And so it's just a really tough, like to match the personnel that you want to, but then also match the skill sets of the personnel. That's another layer, another wrinkle that you have to worry about. And it can kind of create some headaches if you are, if you're a defensive coordinator. Let's see. Way Offsides, really interested in how they're going to use Zulu at Bandit, and I just shortened that because I still have not perfected it. Here's what I'll say, because I'm glad you brought that up. Malik Franklin is a true freshman, 3-star recruit, but I think he's, it was a really good late addition for Alabama, in my opinion. I have been going under the assumption that he was going to be a Bandit. I had him, Jamarian Matthews, and Nolan Wilson all listed as true freshman Bandit candidates. And then I had Kamarian Johnson and Corey Howard as the 2 interior defensive linemen. Well, Touchdown Alabama posted a video earlier of an interview with Malik Franklin, and he brought up the coaching staff liked him at 3-tech and that they were going to be putting a lot of weight on him. And he said that his current size, I believe, is like 6'6", 252 pounds. I wouldn't be shocked if he was 6'5" on the roster. They might list him as 6'6", but a lot of times these high school kids, I said I was 6'1". I wasn't 6'1". I was like, I'm talking about like 5'11" and 7/8 or something like that. Like so I really could have easily said 6 foot, but I always, my senior year, I was 6'1". We're trying to fudge. We're trying to get these colleges interested. So I always end up taking an inch off of any high school, whatever they tell me. That's my typical approach to that. But being 6'5", 252 pounds right now, and then playing a 3-tech, good pass rushing upside, think you would bring a lot from that standpoint. But it kind of changes things a little bit because I'm looking at Bandit and I'm seeing, Cavante Henry and Des Zulu and Devin Tompkins, who I currently have listed as a Bandit. I don't know if Tompkins plays as a 3-tech or if they end up leaving him or having him play outside. That's something I'm going to be looking out for in the spring, because if Devin Tompkins doesn't play Bandit, this position group gets really interesting. Because just think, if you take Devin Tompkins away from that, you got Cavante Henry, you got Des Zulu, you got Caleb Smith, who's a redshirt freshman transfer from Washington. Have no idea really what to expect from that guy. And then Jamarian Matthews and Nolan Wilson, I believe. Now, some people have also pointed out that Jamarian Matthews has been quoted in past articles saying that they might want him as a 3-tech as well. I don't foresee that early. Maybe I'm wrong on that. I really thought that Jeremiah Beeman was going to show up and be a Bandit, though. He was listed at like 6'4", like 260, and then he shows up and he's a 290-pound interior guy. So maybe Jamarian Matthews ends up showing up way bigger than I think and ends up playing on the interior. But with where Bandit is at, I would be shocked by that. But Tompkins, to me, he's got to be the headliner right now. Now, I think we are somewhat sleeping on Cavante Henry a little bit. And Des Zulu, I do think that's where the coaching staff is going to play him, but he's 255 pounds. And even if you add substantial mass and size to him, I still don't think you want him being your starting Bandit out the gate, especially. So what is it? Is it Cavante? Is it Caleb Smith? Are you starting a true freshman there? Or is it a guy like Devin Tompkins? That's why I say, despite the fact that early on I thought Tompkins was going to be playing on the interior, I'm more so right now. I'd be shocked if he wasn't playing Bandit. But at the same time, that's no guarantee. Let's see. Yes, I was 6 foot. Yes. I don't know if is that bragging? I've never viewed 6 foot as like bragging. But anyways, I don't even know if I fully answered your question talking specifically about Zulu. I've compared him to Keon Keeley. And the reason that I say that is a lot of they're not the same skill set, but a lot of the things that I thought about Keeley as a player, like, okay, this is, there's some pass rushing upside, but there's still some rawness. You've still got to tap into that. You're not getting enough consistency. I think there's a lack of functional strength from a run stopping perspective. He's like he's not athletic enough or fluid enough or comfortable enough playing off the ball to play Wolf. But you also probably, from a run stopping standpoint, he's really not going to give you what the typical Bandits would give you. So he was, in my opinion, like I never knew what to do with Keeley a little bit. I've mentioned that I feel like the coaching staff had him be a bigger Bandit than the rest of them because they wanted to put as much mass on him as possible so he could better hold up as a run defender. And I could totally see them if they don't want to use Zulu situationally, then I think you're going to see Zulu put on substantial mass. I can see him being 270 plus. If they are willing, if they feel pretty comfortable with like a Devin Tompkins being their, main Bandit, and then Henry, who I do once again think is a little bit underrated, if they feel like he's ready to kind of take that next step and be a rotational piece, or Jamarian Matthews ends up being, a guy who's ready to contribute, or maybe a Nolan Wilson, or maybe Caleb Smith ends up being better than I'm thinking he's going to be, early on, then maybe Zulu will be allowed to stay at a little bit of a lighter weight. And that way, if you're viewing him kind of like that complementary, obvious passing situation, pass rusher opposite Yanze Pierre, he's now in a position where he's still going to be big. I mean, still going to be 255, maybe 260, but you're allowing him to maintain as much of that explosiveness as possible. Like I went back and watched Keon Keeley yesterday, just from out of curiosity, and Zulu, I wanted to directly compare them side by side, watch the tape for one, immediately watch the tape for the other. And I will say, I did come away thinking Keon Keeley showed a little bit more. I wouldn't have said that before. Now, I'd watched the tape sporadically all throughout the season. I thought Keeley had done some good things, but a lot of times I came away thinking we need more from him. He's still just not quite there. And I thought he looked a little bit too big, a little bit too sluggish at times. And I really was like, man, I'd love to see this cat at like 265 or 270 max. But just putting them side by side pretty much, I realized that Keeley's got a little bit more explosiveness to him. Now, that doesn't mean that Zulu can't be a good player. I think he can fill a lot of what Keon Keeley gave you, but I just wanted to be fair that I've been kind of directly comparing them and thinking, well, you're not going to lose anything. And I do think that from an upside perspective, you probably lost a little bit, but just right now, I don't think you use Zulu as a typical Bandit like you would some of these others, like you would a Devin Tompkins. Devin Tompkins is going to be a guy who's going to, in my opinion, if he does play Bandit, he's going to be an early down, run down outside guy who then slides inside in more of those obvious passing situations. Zulu, avoid that as much as possible. Now, if you end up running into an injury situation like you did last year, or a situation where like LT Overton has to miss time and Keon Keeley has to play more snaps out of necessity, then, you're putting them in a position where they're probably not going to be at their best, but you don't have a choice. But if you can trust some of these other guys and keep Zulu's weight down, I more so think that would benefit him. And I think that could make him a fairly effective pass rusher in those obvious passing situations. Let's see. Miami just had a linebacker into the portal. Is Bama showing any interest? Are you talking about a new one? Because they've had a ton of guys who have entered the transfer portal, and there's one in particular that I've been keeping my eye on a little bit. Now, granted, I don't know. I think he's kind of one of their next guys up kind of thing. But I'm just curious. Okay, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to spend a lot of time doing that. Let me know who the linebacker is. I wouldn't be shocked if Alabama did show some interest in a linebacker, but that's no guarantee at this point. Let's see. Danny Boy. Hey, Clint. Don't know if I missed anything from this week, but is there any lagging positions that Bama still needs to address, or is that just up to player development? I think you're in a pretty good spot with the offensive line from an experience standpoint, from a talent standpoint, from a number standpoint. And when you actually look at the defensive line, I mean, 16 total guys right now, 6 bandits, 10 interior guys. That's pretty healthy. I think you have to add another Wolf. Now, you might not get anybody that is going to be a significant contributor, but just from a number standpoint, you've got to get more than just 2 guys. And I understand people have been saying, well, Zulu can maybe play Wolf or maybe a Jamarian Matthews. And it's like, I'm telling you, no. They'd be way too limited. Your Wolf wouldn't be able to give what it's supposed to be able to give if either of those 2 guys were on the field as a Wolf. So just from that type of skill set, and that could be Xavier Griffin, like it really could be. And maybe you end up seeing another guy, one of these other off-ball linebackers who maybe they just put there, like a Zay Hall or something. He's a big, long. I mean, he's not overly long, but he's like 6'3", 240 maybe or something like that. Like maybe they end up doing something like that, but you just have to have more numbers there. Just 2 guys right now who can actually play that position the way it needs to be played. There's just no way. No way. And I fully expect another Wolf to be added. Offensively, you only have 8 wide receivers. Churgwin is one of them, and he's kind of, he did get put on scholarship, and great on him. That's awesome. But I still kind of view him as a walk-on. So I think from a scholarship perspective, and MJ Mathis kind of similarly. So when you look at that, I mean, really like 6 true receivers. Probably need another one there, bare minimum. I would have liked to have seen 10 receivers. Don't know that they get there, but they just better hope they don't start running into some injuries at probably a couple of these spots, because if they do, it gets thin pretty quick. I could see another running back, but it would more so, I think they just want to be at 6. It's not that they're going to add anybody. At least I don't think. They could add a Dre Washington type who's got like a little bit of upside, and maybe they say, okay, this guy could come in and give us another potential option, or they just take the route of, we're just going to bring in another body, a smaller school guy like an MJ Mathis type, or if they could find another Trayshawn Brown, that'd be amazing, because I think he's a pretty underrated player. I like him a lot for their RB5, but I do think they probably add another one of those. Let's see. Tony Todd, can't wait to see how the inside linebacker room shakes out. I think QB Reese may be one of those players who, if you put him on the field, you might not be able to take him off. He's a playmaker, man. He just makes plays, kind of all over the place. And he does it in a variety of ways. He's fun. I wouldn't say he's like the most spectacular, physical, he's not a physical marvel at the position or anything like that. I mean, being 6 foot, 224 pounds, a little bit undersized, and he doesn't really have like the type of build like a guy like, he's kind of got Jalen Moody. I remember anytime you get in late in games or in practice, like he did make a lot of plays, but he had some athletic limitations. Good player, not a great player, but I don't know. QB Reese is really interesting because he really shouldn't be as good or as effective as he is at his size. And it's not like he's not like he's Justin Jefferson, where he runs like a safety. Like he doesn't have any sort of spectacular speed. He's got good speed. You have to, but he's just a really good football player and great instincts. And he's always run the football and he's always making plays. And so there's so many things from a physical standpoint that make me want to sleep on him. And I just know that I'm going to regret it if I do. So I always bring him up. And I wouldn't be shocked if he ended up being a starter. And I wouldn't be shocked if he ended up being a pretty good player. But he's one of those guys that just does it despite some of the physical limitations. And I kind of like those guys They play with heart, and I think Alabama could use as much of that as possible. So, yeah, got another super chat. Superfly, appreciate the 9.99 super chat. Love all of your hard work, Clint. Heard you over on the Miller's Edge earlier and knew I had to tune in for this one. Another one for the offensive line. Thank you so much for tuning in. I appreciate that. Thank you for the compliment. That means the absolute world to me. It really does. And as far as, getting another one for the offensive line, I love it, man. I love it. I love the competition. It's still a lot of uncertainty. But at this point, you now have a center who's got pretty extensive starting experience. Maybe not on this level, but he's got pretty extensive starting experience. You now have a right tackle who's got not a ton of experience. He didn't start the entire season or anything for Alabama, but he's got enough starts under his belt. He's platooned enough. He's played enough snaps where you've got some experience at right tackle. And now you've added an option at left tackle who has multiple years of starting experience, including one in the SEC. And so, I'm looking at that and I'm saying, okay, we're starting to get somewhere from an experience standpoint. And just they've continued to stack young talent that fits the system. So there's a good blend there. And what I like about Jayvin James is that he's not the most athletic guy, but he is athletic enough for sure to fit the system, in my opinion. But he's not like the best athlete that's going to be on the roster on the offensive line. But, before, I feel like that they ended up going with a guy like Kim Dewberry because they looked at the offensive line. They looked at the returning guys they had, a Caden Proctor, a Jaden Roberts at the time, a Wilkin Formby, a Geno Vandermark, and they thought, okay, we've already got a bunch of these guys, these kind of bigger bodies, and, we're going to have to call things differently anyways. And so they were more willing to add a Cam Dewberry type of player where he brought the experience and he really stacked on the experience of your offensive line, especially in the SEC, which made them, from a continuity standpoint and experience standpoint, very desirable as an offensive line. But he didn't really fit the system, didn't fit the offense. And Jayvin James, he brings the experience, but he also, at least enough, he brings the schematic fit. And I think that that's awesome. Like they didn't have to say, well, there's just nobody really available who's got both, it's both a scheme fit and brings the experience, especially on this level. So we're going to have to sacrifice somewhere. They said, no, we're going to get an SEC guy. He's going to fit the scheme. He's going to have experience. That's a winning combination. Not the most dominant player. When you think about it from that standpoint, that checked a lot of boxes today. It really did. And so that makes me really excited about this group. I appreciate you, Superfly. That's awesome. Let's see. Thomas Irwin, Clint, how much playing time do you expect Crowell, the running back, to see next season as a true freshman? Thanks. I don't think you can go in banking on him getting significant playing time. I think if you're at that point where you just have to have a running back or a true freshman come in and provide significant snaps, you have failed from a roster building perspective. Like even a couple of years ago with Ryan Williams, I looked at that group and I saw guys like Kobe Prentice who had some experience playing, Kendrick Law. Like they had some dudes in that room on top of bringing in Jerry Bernard and stuff where it's like, okay, you don't have to get contributions from Ron Williams. If you get it, that's great. They ended up getting it and getting it in a major way. I really wasn't expecting that considering his youth, but it was like, I get that he's an incredible player and it's possible that he pushes for time. But if you go into the season saying, well, this guy's going to be one of our starters from day one, you are really screwing yourself over, or potentially screwing yourself over. And so I like the guys ahead. So they weren't in a position where you just had to have it. I think the running back room with where it currently stands, Daniel Hill chipped in and contributed, was a pretty good player. I would say finished the season, if not RB1, RB1B, but Kevin Riley participated. Like AK Deere got his feet wet a little bit, and he's a very talented player now going into year two. And then, once again, you wouldn't do that with Trayshawn Brown. But I'm looking at this room and I'm saying, if EJ Crowell is not ready to be that dude out the gate, and he's kind of overwhelmed, maybe pass protection's giving him trouble, or learning the system, or whatever it ends up being, I don't think you're at a point where you have to get it from him. If you don't get it from him, you don't get it at all. because I really like the potential upside, especially of AK Deer. But if they can continue to put mass on Kevin Riley, I think that would help him. I think Daniel Hill will continue to give you, if you can get better blocking from your offensive line, and really have a threat as far as your passing game more consistently, because it started to fall off a little bit and you had zero vertical passing game in 2025. I think that should help a guy like Daniel Hill. But there's no doubt that if he ends up clicking like Ryan Williams clicked, it's that type of impact. It's a game-changing option for you offensively that's going to immediately strike fear into opposing defenses. That's what Ryan Williams brought to the table. That's what Xavier Crowell potentially brings to the table. It's just this dynamic presence. You just don't want to bank on that necessarily. Let's see. We got anything else? Ricky Smith, it's a question that we get quite often, so I'll go ahead and bring it up. Do we have the coaches to coach up this talent we have? Look, I've had my questions too at some of these spots. Really, offensive line is the biggest one. To an extent, running back, to an extent, not really, but I mean, because I'm really not there to the extent that a lot of other Bama fans are, but defensive line, special teams right now is a huge question mark. Like Alabama did a phenomenal job of really shoring up their specialists, their three specialists, with Quinn, Watford, and Stengel, the long snapper. But I have concerns about the special teams, overall. And that goes well beyond that. It's coverage units as well. But I hope that they can get adequate play out of special teams, because they really didn't for most of the year in 2025. And I think that put them in a position where they lost some games maybe, or were in a position to lose some games that maybe they shouldn't. Special teams really got Georgia rolling in the SEC championship. If you don't see that block punt, it was kind of some back and forth, defensive play prior to that. It was the block punt that really got Georgia rolling. I'm not saying they don't lose, but maybe they don't get blown out. Maybe we're only talking about it. I think the Indiana thing was happening regardless, but maybe we're not talking about Alabama getting blown out twice, 2 out of their last 3 games, if the special teams doesn't completely flop and hand Georgia all kinds of momentum early in that football game. There was too many times where it was a problem. Chris, the Bammer, when are you going on Chuck Oliver again? Good question. They typically reach out from time to time. I just have to, just whenever he reaches out, and a lot of times, like I have people hit me up all the time, and I try to get to as many of them as I possibly can. But sometimes just the schedule just doesn't work. I get swamped, and just the way I immerse myself in film and trying to stay on top of it as much as I can. It's not, even when I'm not doing like a live show myself or writing something up or whatever, I work a ton. I mean, I almost work around the clock. I mean, sitting there watching stuff with my wife last night, and I'm sitting there on my phone working, and I'm like, I need to be present. I need to stop this and spend a little time with her. But just whenever he hits me up and I'm free, I would love to go on. I think I had a couple today, and I enjoyed both of them for sure. Let's see. Malik Bryant. Oh, Malik Bryant. I believe that's the edge. He's like listed as a linebacker, but he was a guy that I believe really plays like an edge outside linebacker type, 6'2" or 6'3", like 240 pounds. And I don't know. He if he's the one I'm thinking of, he entered with a do not contact, whatever no contact tag, which means he kind of already knows where he's going. I haven't heard Alabama be connected to him at all. So maybe that's being done because whoever got him in the portal was doing a little tampering. And maybe Bama doesn't want to be immediately connected to try to mask that as much as possible. I don't know. But I do know that he would help that Wolf room, and he would fit kind of exactly what I'm talking about. And he would fit with a player that I think would be really good. Now, one thing I want with the Wolves, I've been doing this lately, and Jimmy, luckily I had him to compensate yesterday. Didn't have him today, so I went on this whole rant about needing more Wolves. Jamarian Latham should know something relatively soon as far as the waiver for another year of eligibility. And I said with Jimmy, and I'll continue to reiterate, he's not sexy. He's not, it's not going to be this big, flashy name that really gets people excited. A lot of people felt like that he shouldn't have been getting snaps over some of the other players to start the season or last season. But this is a guy who knows this system. He's been around for a long time. He played for Nick Saban. He has a certain standard about him, and he is a good enough player. Like, he is effective. He's not going to be super flashy. He's not going to be this dynamic, twitched up, souped up pass rusher. That's not his game. But I think he can play that wolf position and play it well enough where if you add him back to that room and he is even remotely close to what he was prior to that neck injury, I don't think you could do much better based off of, what I think is currently available. Now, a Malik Bryant, if you were to say pick one, I might go with a Malik Bryant. But once again, I don't think Jermaine Latham would break the bank. I think the familiarity and all those things could really help to me. And maybe that's why you haven't seen them pursue a wolf as much, because they're feeling pretty confident maybe in his health. Maybe they're feeling pretty confident in his ability to get that extra year of eligibility. And so they're viewing it more so as, we got 3 wolves on the roster. Maybe that's how they're looking at it. And that might be why it hadn't been pressed as much. Either way, even if you have 3, I still say from a number standpoint, smaller school guy, you go and you get him, but you probably need to have 4 if you can. But Jermaine Latham, I don't want to forget about him, because I would actually I'd be completely fine with that room if they had Yanze Pierre, who's going to be one of the best players at his position, or really best defensive players in college football in 2026, in my opinion. You would have Justin Hill, a former top 100 recruit, really a top 70 recruit, who has a lot of upside. He is the kind of built to play that wolf position and everything that it entails. And then you got a guy like Jermaine Latham, who, can play that position and has a ton of experience. And so I would feel good about that room. I really would. All right. We do have a super chat. We'll go ahead and get to it. Andrew Warren, appreciate the $9.99 super chat. Clint, of all the players that have entered the portal for Alabama that haven't found a new home, who would you like to see this staff consider bringing back? Ooh, that is a good question. How many? So Hampton ended up at Oregon State. Cam Howard ended up at Boston College. Rock Montgomery, Western Kentucky. Richard Young, Colorado. Jalen Mbakwe and Joe Ionata, both at Georgia Tech. Jalen Hell at SMU. Olas Alinen at Kentucky. Noah Carter at Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech did a good job, by the way. I think they added some talent. I was watching Noah Carter earlier too. I'm going to miss that guy. I really am. I think he had a lot of upside. I think he's a good player. He wasn't going to be Alabama's top. He wasn't going to be in the top 2 as far as Wolf. So he's one of those where I just don't blame him for leaving, because he was good enough right now to contribute. But let's see. Cole Adams ended up at Vanderbilt. Micah DeBose ended up at Vanderbilt. Logan Formby at Texas A&M. Keon Keeley, Notre Dame. Cam Calhoun, Quay Russaw, and James Smith all at Ohio State. Arkell Enugwam at Northwestern. Kelby Collins at South Carolina. Isaiah Horton at Texas A&M. Jordan Renaud at Ole Miss. I'm not seeing many guys who entered the portal who haven't found a new home. I think even David Bird and Peter Nataro, I think both of those guys found new homes, if I'm not mistaken. I don't have that listed yet. But who would be some players? And you might have just didn't realize that all those guys had signed. But is there anybody I'm missing? Is there anybody that stands out to people that has not signed with a school that maybe would fit that? Because I do want to answer it if possible, but based off of what I'm seeing, everybody's already locked up. Let's see. Luke Phillips, Jalen Hill ended up at SMU, so wouldn't be one. All right, that's probably gonna do it for this one. Good conversation, guys. I appreciate all you guys for being here. I feel good about this offensive line. I really do. Now, granted, when I say I feel good about it, I'm not saying that you're going to see a unit step on the field and be super impactful from day one, and it's going to be fixed and it's all going to be better. I think there are growing pains ahead. I really do. But I like the way that it's been constructed. You've got to get development from it. I'll continue to reiterate that every time I talk about the offensive line. But they're in a position now where this group can come together, compete, push each other, get better, and there's enough talent here to really start to get something going. And I think that the sooner you get that offensive line going, the sooner you're going to be able to help your young quarterback, the sooner you're going to be able to create more holes for your running backs. It's just going to make everything operate a lot easier. You can take pressure off of your defense because you can run the football more effectively. You can score more points. So it all works hand in hand. It all goes together. But that offensive line, we talk about it all the time, but it's kind of where a lot of it starts. And so I like what they're building. But once again, there's going to be some growing pains. But I appreciate everybody for hopping on. Let me talk about Jayvin James a little bit. Once again, like to pick up. Appreciate everybody. Let me talk about just ramble. That's what I do most of the time on here. But this has been fun. I don't think Alabama's done. And as soon as they end up adding somebody else, we'll be right back on here talking about how they impact the roster and everything else. And we'll continue to do that regardless if anybody else is added, because now it's really starting to shift the focus towards, we're like 40-something days out, I believe, from spring practice getting underway. Like, we're not too far off, and there's going to be a lot of just being crammed in there as far as roster dynamics, position battles, a lot of content planned for you guys. So thanks all of you guys for being here. Once again, we appreciate you, and we will talk to you guys soon. Be sure to get on over to rowback.com. Use the promo code Crimson20 to get 20% off your order, and we will talk to you guys soon.